watching NotesIn9.
Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 180, Alternate Front-End Development. MWLUG was awesome. You should have been there. Speaking of MWLUG, we wrapped it up in Atlanta just a little while ago. I want to say a big thanks to all the organizers, and especially the sponsors, for putting the show on. Big thanks to Richard Moy and his team, and all the sponsors that came out and helped make the event what it was, and it was a great event. There, the technical content was amazing to see, and I was just very glad to return to MWLUG. It's always been a great event. So if you're looking for training, if you're looking to make connections or so, this is the place to do it. It's a $50 ticket. This past year, it's usually been just about $50 or so, and you pay for your own room and board, and then you're done. It's not like you're starting off in the hole with like an $1,800 ticket or so. And these sessions are great. They're technical. The one session had a flying drone that talked to XPages and Bluemix or something like that. I mean, and I didn't even go to see that session because I thought, yeah, I knew that was gonna be great. Don't get me wrong, but there was another one that I thought was a little more day-to-day value to me. So I mean, the choices this year were so hard in so many slots, and that's just is showing the maturity of the conference and the excellence of their tracks and the speakers they got in there. I didn't try to speak this year because I'm kind of semi-retired from live speaking, and I probably wouldn't have even got in from this, and I don't blame him, quite honest, because I've seen my own stuff. But next year, it's coming to Austin, Texas. So next year, I am all in. I'm going to try to speak. I'm going to at least submit. I am going to try to sponsor something, if only a beer keg. I'm damn well going to sponsor it because I'm going to support this conference as best as I can. And again, like I said, I'm going all in, and it's going to Austin, Texas. And I've not really spent much time to Texas, but when you talk about Texas, especially Austin, Texas, that means one thing and one thing only: barbecue. I am there. So this is a brisket, which is a gift from the gods. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, this is a picture of the world famous Franklin Barbecue, and that's the line. They open at 11. That might be the line at 8 o'clock. I'm not sure. And they just go to they sell out. I am going to be at that place at some point, either before or after MWLUG. I invite any ex-pager or anyone to come in with me. I might even somehow sponsor an outing to get there, but there's no one allowed to chip the line unless you're the President of the United States, apparently. But anyway, give MWLUG a thought. Watch out for that for any details. It's obviously still early on, but that is the place to be if you want to learn techniques in this space. Okay, just a quick NotesIn9 note. I think I've had this on the last couple shows or so, but I'm going to be moving to YouTube only at some point. Trying to get in gear on that, so that might mess up your iTunes and RSS. So just be aware of that. There are websites out there that help you download from YouTube, like KeepVid and stuff like that. So we'll have more information on that as I close it on that. All right, today my good friend and expert developer Eric McCormick comes on. He's an IBM champion. Eric's great because he's like me. He's a customer. He's not a business partner. He doesn't really have an agenda. He's just here trying to help people. And better than me is he's smarter than me, and he's got more tools in his toolbox. So he's more of a Java guy than I am. He does other things in X Pages. So he's just an all around expert, and I'm always glad to have him come on. The only problem when he does come on is he always uses this demo database, which I assume is from Game of Thrones. I've never seen the Game of Thrones. Eric obviously likes it, so that must say something about either him or me. I'm not quite sure what it says. Um, but that is what it is. He's on Twitter. There's his Twitter handle. And actually, in Atlanta, he actually pronounced it. I didn't know you could pronounce that. I'm not sure what the pronunciation is of that, so I'm not going to try it. But he is on Twitter. Reach out to him if you have any questions. He's on the web. And again, he's a great guy. And he's got his beard. I like to call him Mr. Beard, and there he is. So okay, today he's going to give us a demo on using alternate front ends to get to your X Pages data. And I believe he uses AngularJS in this, and I actually said that without spitting, so I'm improving at least. But you don't have to use AngularJS. You could use any front end that you wanted. And I think it's a great thing for all of us XPages or Notes people or whatever to get out of the box and learn how to do other things. Doesn't mean you have to give up your Notes server. We're not pushing for that or so. But we're pushing for, if you wanted to, you could. So it's great to have options with your front end, and it's great to have options in your back end. So it's better to be a web developer than being a one-trick pony. Um, I know we're committed to XPages, and that's not going away at the day job. But I'd love to know how to, you know, reach into my data with something like maybe Angular, but probably more likely, something like Swift from iOS or whatever else is out there. So what Eric's going to do is give us a little demo on kind of how that might look. So with all that being said, let's go to the demo.
Hi, I'm Eric McCormick, and I'm going to show you a couple quick tricks on things you can do to help make your life a little bit easier as a developer, and also one nifty thing on the side. So who am I? I'm a developer, been on Notes Domino, specifically XPages centric, since fall of 2012. Been at it for a little bit over 3.5 years now. I also like to tinker with a lot of different things, and I like to do a lot of web normal things as well, as you may or may not be aware. I have this blog. I sometimes write blogs, and this post will mostly relate to this alternate front-end development here. This post that I did a little bit over a week ago. It's ultimately, to me, an extension of the series I did on HTTP servlets, and without getting too far into that, just know that where I left that series off, I completed a round of Java code to structure and drive the HTTP servlets that I implemented, which are contained within the NSF, and that my application on the client side in the browser, which happens to use AngularJS, which is a framework, you can use any number, interacts purely by a RESTful API back to the NSF container, fully adhering to credentialed users. So if you have reader field access, that's perfectly going to adhere to it, along with all the other author constraints that you put into your business logic for your code. And that's the appeal to me. That and the fact that it's portable. Long term, I'm looking to get into OSGI plugins for these servlets. Toby Samples has been doing a couple of blog posts on those, and I am completely eating them up. Once I get more into things, I may share what I learned from what Toby's been posting, but that's for another day. This is the first NotesIn9 video I did, and the only previous one, and this covers a lot of my blog series up to now. And if you learn better by video, I recommend checking it out. Looks pretty good, if I do say so myself, which I just did. I also have the code base for that on GitHub under my own repository, as you can see here, and links to it on my blog and in the NotesIn9 video, I believe, as well. You can check out clone a copy of my OnDisk project. You'll notice a few things here outside of the NSF folder, and some of that comes into play with what I'll be talking about here. Before I get to that, I have a side trick that I'd like to share. Now, this ribbon up here underneath the header information about contributors, releases, branches, commits, this has to do with language details. Now, normally, you click on something like that, and this is an example only. The OpenNTF XPages extension library shows it's mostly Java project, which is true, with a lot of JavaScript, CSS, and some other stuff. And that's just a breakdown that happens every time GitHub builds off of its repository, usually to the default, aka master repository. There's a gem, a Ruby gem, that fires off on their server and aggregates all those kinds of totals from the code base. Since about 3 days ago now, since about the 29th, it went live. Linguist, the package or project inside of GitHub's own repository, has a merged commit adding, at least at a tacit level, XPages support for language definition, meaning now in mine, I believe I'm the first out here, I can see XPages as a project type. So you can see, according to the definition, I'll get there in a second, I have just over a third of my application as being defined as XPages, along with Java being the core, along with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So the way that works is, by default, Linguist is only going to pick up on the very unique namespaced file extensions for .xsp config and .xsp metadata. Now you can get around that by, in the .getAttributes file, mapping .xsp extension along with, say, .form or .view, and you can get more granular as well, and you can perform a linguist override for this package of language equals XPages. It's a bit of a glamour thing. Honestly, I'm just trying to play up the awareness of the platform, especially as we're going forward. I'm putting it on GitHub anyway. Might as well plug our own platform, so that's kind of neat if I do say so myself. That's twice I've done that. Alright, now that that's done, let's get back to the actual content. So, this post I had on alternate front-end development came down to a couple concepts I've been structuring over the course of my blog series and my application demo app, the AKA app that never was. I have an app I've been writing and extending, and I've been running it inside of a Windows VM because even though I use Mac at home, I'm using Domino Designer, running local web preview, even demoed how to use Nginx to liberate your preview outside of the VM container. But that's not really the focus here. The fact of the matter is I have two sides of my application, a back end and a front end. And that being the case, in theory, and now in practice for me, as I've shown actually, it's only a little bit difficult to set up the first time. After that, it gets kind of easy. You can mock your back-end data with some freely available open source packages. So here's my back-end running. I can open up a tab that goes to believe I got the path correct there. No, okay, so it doesn't exist. That's bound to happen. That's probably because I borked something up. But you can see it's a Domino response here, and I think I just screwed up the path name. There it is. So here it is running my current version as of today. My DDE previews in the current develop branch level, and I have a few more things beyond what I last demoed, obviously. This is the purely Angular side of things in raw HTML files, the way a lot of the web normal people do it, outside of the Notes Domino XPages community, and there are reasons for that, and I hope you come to my session, which sounds slightly scarily admin-y, at MWLUG, but I can guarantee that it's from a developer's perspective, my perspective, because I'm not actually an admin, I just pretend to be on occasion, when it suits me to my advantage, and that will be a session covering using Nginx as a reverse program along with other modules like Google PageSpeed to help speed up your applications. And what comes into play is all these static assets that get loaded by the browser that don't need to be generated every time the page gets loaded can be cached and used to your advantage. Just as with an API endpoint, we would set it to no cache. We can use the reverse of that, the converse rather, to cache those assets that don't change frequently to our advantage. And in a lot of ways, that's how HTML5 web apps can be offline capable, or at least not break when you disconnect from the internet. In any case, that's an aside. Say I want to work on this front end, and I don't want to have to fire up, say, a VM or a remote connection through, say, Citrix or something else. And I want to be able to work on the front end and all this pretty, along with some of the client-side application logic without having Domino Designer, a Domino server instance, and just being able to work on the nuts and bolts because I know my back end handles get, put, post, delete requests all a specific way according to a certain format, say application JSON, and say I already know that and that's set and locked in stone. I don't need to work on the back end when I work on the front end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit VMware and this will no longer work at this path. But if I open up this and I'm in my project path, you can see I have my files here. And what I'm doing currently is, just as my blog post on alternate front-end development talks about, I need to set up one thing first because this is a symlink. It won't replicate through source control because that's just silly. Subordinate files can. I have an entry in my git ignore so that I don't do so, where I need to create a public path to emulate the actual front-end server. Now I'm going to show you what happens if you don't first, because I'm relying on a package called, it's from a user/organization called Typicode, and they created this open source package that runs on Node.js called JSON server. So if I were to run JSON server against my db.json, which is just a prepared collection of the two different data collection formats I have with full collections in them. So an individual one maps to a full record as opposed to only a partial with only a few fields for header info. I can go ahead and hit enter because I've already installed this by npm install, and I installed it globally, so -g JSON server. Once this finishes setting up here, I'll be able to access it through my web browser or through any local connection that connects over HTTP, and it defaults to port 3000. And it occurs to me now I probably should have started this first. Once it loads, you can see it gives you a little welcome message. It's been pointed at the flat file JSON file. It says hi, it's trying to be all friendly. And it sees that I have an object with two different arrays at these endpoints, and that the home path is this. So as you can see, they have a boilerplate HTML file, and they inject in what you have. So you can always view, even if you have, because it allows for static asset rendering, mocking the front end server, you can always get to /db or the resources here. Now this doesn't map to what my REST API backend calls itself. So I also have a routes.json, which JSON server supports, and you can see I've mapped out the /xsp houses and houses / by ID, and then there's another parameter that I can pass it that lets me emulate the ID key. So it defaults to ID, but MongoDB uses _ID and others use other ones. I'm using one called unid. And as you can see here, this local client's version behind by a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do this because I happen to know that in 0722 and 0723 that there was an issue which got updated. There was a regression where the ID didn't update. So if I were to talk about an individual record on this machine at this point in time, it would not work correctly. I'd get an empty object back in JSON, even though I'd be forming it correctly. So 0724, I was able to, wonders of open source, file an issue on the GitHub repository. I heard back relatively quickly about, oh, yep, this is gone, new one's coming out, and I was able to confirm on my other machine that that was the case. So why would I do this? I'd want to do this because I want to work on the front end specifically, and while this loads, you can see I have my editor of preference, Sublime Text. Others out there use WebStorm. Honestly, I really like what Sublime Text does for me. So while this loads, I'm going to do the other part, which is to create that symlink. My blog post tells about how to do it in Windows, but here's how I do it on a Mac or Linux, Unix machine. It's ln with the tach s, and then I tell it the path it's coming from and what to map it to. And all a symlink is it's essentially a shortcut. Think a shortcut. So I'm going to be mapping my NSF web content path to public. Public is common in the Node.js world for being the public client-side application of things. You can call it and route it different ways, but not to worry. So now you can see I have public here. Sublime text is being slow to update. Just know that it's here and it exists. So my directory structure has a root index HTML. And I'm starting to tax this machine slightly. Then additionally, I have a couple helper files and tags for assets that I load. I'm going to expand to pick up dynamically. I have a favicon that I put a slightly prettified one in base 64 here. And you can see development, but let me load it in this mocked backend environment. But for the most part, the API interacts the same. And as you can see here, that's done. Now, I have in my package.json, so provided you have Node installed in your machine and you install a JSON server, then all your dependencies are met according to this package.json. So repository is type get, dependencies JSON server, dependencies are met. So in scripts in start, I have this all spec'd out, meaning that for you to fire off everything with all the correct parameters, it doesn't have to be too complicated. Type npm, which is Node Package Manager. Well, correction, does not stand for Node Package Manager. They did that deliberately a while back, so it'd work with io.js, which is a forked project off of Node. And all I have to do is type npm start. And it does the correct load. Everything else comes up correctly. I have my symlink defined, and you can see here now, not that one, I'm using Firefox. But if I reload this page, I am now pointing at my application just as I would hope to. So in my console window here, and you can use terminal on any Linux, Unix based box. From Windows, you can use, I like to use my Git bash shell emulator. That's my preference. You can also use the command interpreter, CMD. But you can see I'm loading up my, by default, about page. I've got my houses collection, individual records, create new, all that kind of stuff. So a whole bunch of goodies in here. And say I want to work side by side. Well, suddenly I've got my text editor of choice, my browser of choice, my OS of choice, and I can do all kinds of cool, crazy stuff right here without working too far into things. So say I needed to update a filter, an Angular filter. I can do it right here. Think of a filter as just a helper function. So that's not too pertinent to what we're doing, but hey, I can go make a change. So say I don't like how my about partial, which is HTML, is all laid out. Say that this is too big and I want this last blurb to be only half that, and let's say I want to offset it like I'm doing in the small breakpoint size up here. So that's offset by 3, and I'm going to do a just like that, call sm offset 3. And all I have to do is reload here. And now that's skinnied up just like I was expecting to. I can test it live real quick without any additional VM running. And it makes it real easy to focus on each side of your application without any additional distractions. Thanks for watching, and I hope that helps. If you're looking to learn more about any of these topics, check out my blog. I mentioned each of them, and please stay tuned to my GitHub repository, and I hope to see you in Atlanta for MWLUG.
And that's the demo. I thank Eric for coming on the show. I can't wait for him to return. Here's my contact information, and I thank you for your time.